Happy New Year, everyone. It's been a long time since I made a chess video, and I'm glad to be back. Uh, I want to show you a game from Bill 1990 between Grandmaster Lev Pogaevsky with the white pieces and British Grandmaster Tony Miles with the black pieces. And the subject of this video is playing unorthodox openings and how they can be beneficial. All right, so this game started off d4 from Pogaevsky and d6 by Anthony Miles. Now, as you can see, this is very flexible and it gives white a myriad of options to choose from. I mean, he can switch into a king's pawn game after e4, and the game can end up in a modern, say after d6, g6, for example. This is even possible. Okay, and these lines are not anything that black really has to worry about too much. All right, even though black is deprived of castling, um, he normally finds a good spot for his king, and all is well. So the point is, black has many transpositional opportunities based on what white does. And so now that brings us to one of our first points, is that the benefit of playing in an unorthodox fashion is to avoid extensive opening preparation and theory from your opponent. This is great for a player that has good chess understanding, good experience playing, and but perhaps has not played chess in a while, or perhaps does not study opening theory too much. This will often level the playing field in the opening, right? And then the player with more experience can often just outplay his opponent by getting away from theory a little earlier. So in this game, d4 by Pogaevsky, and now d6 from Miles. And the Soviet Grandmaster Pogaevsky was a renowned theorist, of course, and of course it's reasonable to see that Miles would like to avoid some deep opening preparation. And at the same time, Miles was known for playing off-beat systems from time to time. Game continued, knight f3, and now bishop g4. Now this might look very strange to some of you, but I want you to think of this opening now. Now I'm going to just quickly reverse the colors, and just imagine this system. So again, d4, knight f6, and bishop g5. Now many of you should know this opening, right? This is the Trompowsky variation. I'll go back. Again, it's the Trompowsky variation. Okay, so all we see here, going back to our game after d4, d6, knight f3, remember white has an extra tempo being moved ahead, is we basically see that Miles is playing the Trompowsky tempo, a tempi down. And the difference also is that he has not played the move d5 here, which again makes sense, because if he plays d5 here, then he's opening himself up to, the simple Queen's Gambit and going into orthodox lines. Of course, it is quite possible that Pogaevsky might have played knight f3, and then if he wanted to, he can play this Trompowsky type position as black. But here, if he plays d5, he's giving white too many possibilities. So D6 is played. Okay, and it allows um, black to basically set up a position that he wants to in the opening without interference. Okay, so notice that black is not allowing contact to be established. All right, and this is what many players like to do when they play systems such as the modern. Is basically they want to be able to set up uh, their position exactly how they want it, and then start the fight. So a lot of players play G6, D6, B6 in the opening, and again they allow themselves to be cramped, but um, in exchange for being cramped, they are they can play the system they want to play. So here now we have this kind of reverse Trompowsky. So bishop G4, Pogoevsky plays G3 with this idea of fee and kettling, and Miles just gives up the bishop right away. Bishop takes F3, E takes F3, and now E6. Again, it looks extremely abnormal, right, to what you might be used to seeing. The important thing to have is a plan in the position, because yes, the only advantage, if we're gonna say that white has an advantage, he has an advantage in space, and he has an advantage in the bishop pair. But to offset the bishop pair, black has a structural advantage. So that lets us know that this is if we're playing the black pieces, that we are going to try to exploit that structural advantage and also shut down the bishop pair. So that means for the most part we want to try to keep the position closed, and we also want to create outpost for our knights. The outpost allows our knights to prosper since we have two knights, and keeping the position closed keeps the white bishop pair from prospering. So just having that basic strategy, in the start, kind of gives us a direction of how we should be playing. White will, of course, try to open the position, right, to emphasize the fact that he has the two bishops, and also he will try to utilize a space advantage to cramp the opponent and displace the black pieces here. And this is how you will see the game unfold. Black, of course, will have to deal with white space advantage, and meanwhile, again, trying to create outposts for his knights and keep the position kind of bogged down and closed. So let's see what happened. F4 by Pogoevsky, of course, right, taking more space and opening up the diagonal for his bishop. C6, bishop G2, G6, and we see black is just keeping this super solid hedgehog type position, where again the only advantage that white can claim is a space advantage. All right. Knight D2, bishop G7, C3, knight D7 from Miles, A4, and now knight E7. Why knight E7? Well, it's very important, again, to be able to get these knights up the board, and black wants to invade this square F5. The reason why is, first of all, you're blockading these double pawns, and it's very difficult for white just to kick the knight off with the move like G4, right? Because yes, he can move to G4, but then it weakens the king side squares further around the king, especially the H4 square. Okay, the dark squares would be severely compromised in that instance. Castles, rook E1, queen C7, and now again the same principles apply. Yes, the opening was a little weird, but the same principles apply. Remember, I said earlier, one of the things black has to deal with is the white space advantage. Okay, so now black has his ideal setup. He's pretty much completed his development, except for the rooks. The rooks look like they belong in the D and C files if we just glance at the position real quick. And if we look at the potential breaks in the position, right, the breaks that black wants to make in order to neutralize the space advantage, there's basically two realistic breaks here. One is to play for the E5 break. The other is the C5 break. As you can see, the E5 break is a little risky here, as it you have this rook on the E file, and uh, White might be able to exploit the E file to his advantage. The safer break here is the C5 break. All right, and attacking this pawn here. If White chooses not to capture on C5, then it's possible that White will end up with the isolated pawn after Black captures. This would be ideal for Black, having the isolated pawn to attack and the open C file. So the knight f3, again, stopping that and hit or discouraging that break. Black bets on the move c5. With that said, bishop d2 was played. Now, again, I mentioned c5. An alternative move can be a move like b4 here, right, to make it a little bit harder on Black to achieve this break. Of course, probably he would maybe strive for a move, in this case, like a5, perhaps, at some point, and try to make the break. Bishop d2 was played, rook f d8. Alright, and you can see there's nothing wrong with the Black position. Again, he just has to neutralize the space advantage. Is he winning? Of course not. Right, but he's done what he had to do. He equalized the position. Or is well on his way to equality. But again, this space advantage is not anything big for White to write home about. So I would say the position was equal here. Queen c2. There it is, c5. D takes c5. Knight takes c5, keeping the pawn preponderance in the center. C file is open. Notice he did not take with the pawn. He could have taken with the pawn. All right, but he wanted to keep his pawns in the center of the board here. Keep the pawn preponderance in the center. And it creates a slight imbalance also in the position, which creates more winning chances. Knight takes c4. Knight d4. And now knight c6. And now knight b5. Interesting is just simply knight takes c6, doubling the pawns here, since you had this bishop here. And then followed up by this move, bishop e3. But I'm sorry, not doubling the pawns, but capturing on c6. But you can see that this capture strengthens the Black center here. So instead, knight b5 is played, harassing the queen. Queen b8. And again, Black had nothing to worry about here. So bishop e3, a6, bishop takes c5. So White is not really, this is kind of a confession that the bishop here is not really doing too much in the position. So Pogajewski decides to make some exchanges and to see if he can create a different position where he would have some actual winning chances. Note, Black's strategy for the most part has prevailed. He found a decent outpost for his knights. He neutralized the white bishops where they weren't too effective, and Pogajewski agrees and trades off the bishop pair. Now you have a symmetrical position here, and also, let's move this knight. After knight a3, we can see that White's space advantage has been neutralized, right? Because now Black occupies his own territory, right? The first 4 ranks, as we see the pawn now established on c5. And White has the first 4 ranks occupied also. So that space advantage has been neutralized for the most part. The bishop pair is no longer an advantage for White. So he's lost his space advantage and he's lost the advantage of the bishop pair. So that means black still has the advantage now of the pawn structure, because you remember at the beginning, black gave up his bishop pair so that he could damage the white pawn structure. So now black has came out with the net victory there, because now neither side has the bishop pair, but black uh, has the advantage of having a better pawn structure than black. Again, this is a minimal advantage here, just like the occupation of the d file. And so we cannot say that black is better, but black has succeeded at fully equalizing and now has nothing to worry about, and he can pursue chances against white at this moment. He has solved all of his problems by playing this slightly unorthodox opening. Knight e5 by Miles. And the idea here is to play c4. If white is hasty and plays c4 himself, this is not too good here, as the b4 square becomes super weak. This pawn is also weak. And of course, at some point, I don't know, after queen c7 or something like that, this knight will work itself back here, and then this square will be under watch. So after knight a5, rook a d1, c4. Again, this is good for black, as this square b3 becomes quite weak. Queen e2 now, just trying to increase the pressure here to discourage this move right here, knight b3, where this pawn would drop at this moment. So queen e2, queen c7, protecting the pawn even more. Rook takes, bishop f1, again putting more pressure on this pawn. Rook to c8, protecting the pawn. Not b5, because this pawn can capture here in a4. So rook c8, rook d1. So now Polgaevsky takes over the d file. Queen c6, attacking the a4 pawn. So queen c2. Now bishop f8 here. And now knight b1. Also possible, of course, with bishop g2 here. And probably a move like queen b6 would be played here. So not a big not a big deal. Instead, knight b1 was played. Knight b3, as this is protected. And at this point, Polgaevsky decided to jettison this pawn on a4, so he can exchange here at b7. Okay, probably better was, instead of bishop g2, is to play knight d2 here, and then after queen takes a4, just take bishop takes c4, rook takes, and knight takes b3, and maybe a move like bishop e7, and the game is pretty even, right? Drawish. Here, some more imbalances were created here. Rook b8, bishop went back, knight c5. Players entered into this ending. And again, we see that black has benefited as a result of the exchanges, as there's tremendous pressure on the b pawn here. Knight d2, knight takes b2, rook a1, and bishop g7. Bishop returns to the powerful diagonal. Rook takes a6, bishop takes c3, and black, of course, maintains his pawn advantage. Bishop d4, rook c6, knight d3, and we see black getting very active here. And now bishop e2 was played. The idea here is that if rook takes c4, then rook b1, and white will lose this bishop on f3. So, for instance, king g2, knight e1 check, and then either the king has to enter into some type of discovery check situation, losing the bishop, or if he just pops out the h3, again, the bishop on f3 is unprotected. Notice also that when the bishop is captured on f3, that the that black's bishop is protected. So even if he tried to come back and play a move like king g1, then just simply knight e1 check again, and white has no time to grab the bishop. Conversely, if knight f3 here and white tries to come here, again driving the knight away or attacking the knight with the idea of capturing this bishop, then once again either knight takes h2 check, followed by knight f3, kind of repeating the position, or just simply knight g1. Idea here being, if rook takes d4, then you could play f5 check, right, forking the king and the knight here, and still going up a piece, or just h5 here, and then the same thing, king g5, and then knight f3 check. So white is in trouble, right? The black's pieces are too coordinated. Okay, anytime you have all of those options like that, that's a sign of highly coordinated pieces. So there's nothing that white can do at this point, but he decides to play bishop e2 to try to alleviate some of the pressure here. Rook b1 for Miles. This move right here is, just bad because knight takes f2, just losing material. But rook b1 here, king g2, and then you have similar themes. Knight e1 check, king h3, and now, yes, the pawn is under attack, but guess what? Since it's not blockaded, it's a moving target. And now c3, and now you have the rook and knight attacking it, so knight takes c3. So now it looks like Pogaevsky has gained his pawn back, and game should end in a draw in spite of his double pawns. But guess what? Piece activity. Rook b2. So now the rook b2, this bishop on e2 is attacked, and this knight is the only protector. So with this knight being threatened, how does how does white save his piece? Well, he plays this move bishop a6, right, moving the bishop out of the way, but now he loses material here. Rook takes f2, knight e4, rook b2, g4, king g7, bishop c4, bishop g1, rook takes h2 check, and Miles went on to win a very well played game. And the story of this game just became black's piece activity at the end. As you can see, Miles' pieces highly coordinated here. He played a very pretty game, and eventually here Pogaevsky resigned in this position after, say, knight f5 check, for instance, just simply king g5, and there's nothing that white can do to avoid the massive loss of material in the form of checkmate. But again, that was kind of out of the scope of what wanted to do, which was again just talk about the use of the unorthodox openings. One thing I would like to say is that just because you use an unorthodox opening doesn't mean you have to play foolishly or play like a mad